I have 11:59, so, well, it just turned to 12, and so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to ask everyone who is not a panelist to make sure that your Zoom is on mute, please, and we're going to get started. I want to welcome everyone to the next installment of our Higher Equity webinar series, noting that, again, higher equity is the intersection of higher education and equity, and we're here to talk about those emerging trends about equity in higher education. So thank you all for joining us. I want to do a brief introduction, and then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and our experts. And so on our call today, sharing with us, we have Danielle Sims-Brooks, and Danielle is the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs at Jefferson Community and Technical College in Louisville, Kentucky. We also have sharing with us Dr. Molly Kirby, who's the Assistant Provost for Institutional Effectiveness and Chief Diversity Officer for Academic Affairs at Western Kentucky University. And we have Dr. Michael Marshall, who is Bellarmine University's Vice President for Enrollment, Marketing, and Communications. And again, I am Dawn Offit. I am the Director of Initiatives for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Council on Post-Secondary Education. So again, thank you all for joining us for our conversation today. So we wanted to have this webinar centered around what we call Fall 2020, an agenda for progress and equity amid the pandemic. And so I have a few questions that I want to be able to ask our panelists, but if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And as time permits, we'll try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. So at this time, I'm going to ask if our panelists would just give us a brief overview of COVID-19 and its impact on enrollment and retention as you see it in your role and at your institution. So just maybe a 2-minute overview of COVID-19 and its impact. And we'll start with Danielle.
Sure. So here at Jefferson, right here in the heart, where our main campus is right in the heart of downtown, we had about a week. We had that week of spring break, and then the next week, you know, the college, in terms of being able to physically come to campus, was closed. And so I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do in such a short time, in terms of preparing for remote learning, but also continuing to serve our students in terms of student services and helping them navigate those non-academic barriers. And so right now for us, our enrollment report as of last Friday, we're about 20% down in those first-time students. And that's a trend that we're seeing all over the country. Just 2 weeks ago, I was on a webinar for the American Association for Community Colleges, and the presidents and enrollment management folks of those colleges who were represented on the panel were sharing the same thing. But our retention looks good. And so that means that our students who are already with us have decided already, either before this pandemic or during this pandemic, that they were going to continue their education. So now we're shifting our focus to how do we engage that, you know, high school population who also abruptly had to end their semester and transition into online learning, when we were used to be able to get that face-to-face interaction with them through our admissions counselors and, you know, going to those high schools and seeing them face-to-face. But that option is no more. You know, now the focus was shifted to how do we just help students finish the semester? Because, you know, college, that's the last thing on their list. It's like, I have to graduate high school. So now we're seeing a turn where, you know, graduations are pretty much, the semester has ended and, you know, seniors are done. So how do we engage that population remotely? And then also, how do we engage adult learners who may be looking into going to school for the first time and, you know, getting some of these high demand, high wage jobs that are our essential workers right now that we see. And so that's where we are right now. Our enrollment, and it's gotten better week to week. We get a weekly report every week, but enrollment is down, but our retention is up.
Thank you for sharing that. We'll kick that over to Molly to talk about Western Kentucky University.
Well, I mean, pretty much the same situation at WKU and, you know, around the state in terms of we had spring break and then we had an extra spring break week so that faculty get ready to put their classes online. I pulled our data yesterday and our data actually looks pretty good for first time enrollment. especially URMs. URMs are even up a little bit from this time last year to where they are now. It's not a whole lot, but maybe about 100 students. It looks like general population is down just a little bit, but it's not really horrible. I know we were having problems with retention issues, just like Danielle said, that, you know, it wasn't the first time students coming in, it was the people wanting to come back. But I think part of that was that they were sort of kind of waiting out how we were going to deliver education in the fall. So I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, enrollment started to go up again, but we are down a little bit from where we were as well. So we're working through with some teams to get it restarted again. And, you know, I'm really actually a little shocked that our enrollment is what it was. And I was really concerned about some of the underrepresented groups maybe not wanting, you know, wait until the last minute just to see what we were going to do. But we were talking the other day that we kind of think that it might be part of parents are like, is it time for you to go back to school yet? Because we'll get you registered and you can come on back. Can you open those dorms around July so we can get people out? I mean, we're hearing a lot of those kind of things. So, you know, and I try to look at things positively. It looks like we may be okay at WKU. So.
Great. And from the independent and private college perspective, Michael, if you would share your perspective and what's going on with Bellarmine.
Yeah, so in March for us, our students had just returned from spring break, and we made that transition. I have to say, similarly to what Danielle said, I mean, I'm proud of our community in making that transition in a week. We moved 1,100 courses to the remote learning, and you know, the faculty did swimmingly, and we stood that up very quickly. Our students adapted very well. We did outreach to our students, you know, several faculty and staff as part of our Student Success Task Force, and got some overwhelmingly positive feedback. We also some lessons learned. And so for the summer, we are continuing with the online and the remote teaching and learning. And we saw an uptick in enrollment for the summer. We also offered a COVID-19 course over the summer. And so received a lot of positive feedback. Now, specific to the fall, you know, I shared during a more recent Louisville Business First interview that there's really no playbook for this. And so it's difficult, you know, we really don't have a historical frame. I know some have tried to use the sort of Great Recession as a historical perspective, but this is very different. You know, people's lives have been upended. And obviously there's been a tremendous amount of loss of life. And so for us, health and safety continues to remain a top priority. But from a new student standpoint or the enrollment standpoint, we've seen some major impacts. You know, May 1, which serves as that national candidate day or decision day, it came and went. And so students are dealing with a number of issues and trying to manage their reality as well, you know, students and families. And so I think that the deadlines, we've extended our deposit date to June 1, but I think June 1 will come and go. And many students of our new students have indicated that they're waiting to hear about what the definitive plans are going to be for the fall. As Molly indicated, many of the students want to be on campus. And while they did it in the second half of the spring and they're doing it for the summer, they want to be back on campus, many of our students. And so we are certainly working through that process. We were planning to go test optional for next fall of 21, but we did accelerate that given some of the challenges that students face as far as taking SAT, ACT, and then even some of the key data points that we've used in the past to help guide and shape our decision-making process, and some of the intel that we have, such as like FAFSA submission, campus visits, clearly aren't as reliable. So we're really focused more so on local geography. From a retention standpoint, similarly to what Danielle said, it's trending very favorably. So on the new student side, as far as first-year students go, we're down roughly about 9 or 10% compared to where we were this time last year. Transfer, we're up about maybe 20% or so. On the retention side, we're currently seeing the highest retention that we've seen, in the last 4 years. So that's encouraging. As I said, many of our students are taking online courses this summer, so we've seen an uptick in summer enrollment. And even on the graduate student side, we're seeing some promise there. Now, all of that could change, though, if the decision, if all of this changes as we begin to reopen economies and states, and we see that second wave sooner than what folks are anticipating.
So we know that COVID has impacted enrollment and retention for students in general, but in terms of our underrepresented minority student population, those students who fall into vulnerable categories, those low-income students, we know that they've had issues just in general without a pandemic. So how do we go about addressing students who were at risk before the pandemic, now that we're in the midst of the pandemic? Is there something that you all are doing that is specific to those vulnerable populations? And so we'll start with Molly.
Yeah, we have a couple of funds. We have an opportunity fund and an emergency fund too that we've set up. The opportunity fund is a sort of a more longevity thing that goes into the future a little bit more. And then emergency food, for food and those sort of things. We find particularly with the LGBT population that have problems at home and they couldn't go home. And they were left without their student work job, without their shelter, without their food, without their resources. We have food banks set up. I think we're doing some of the same things that other people are doing across the country and across the state of Kentucky. We try to keep a good line of communication. And I was really shocked at one thing that I don't think that's ever quite occurred to me, how the Alumni Association jumped in to help. We actually have a new Pride chapter that is for LGBT alum to support the students on campus. And they jumped in and adopted some students. If the students needed a shelter, they couldn't go home, they let them come and stay with them. Students that were, everybody's a kid to me if they're over 35 now, or under 35. But people that couldn't, afford to get food and those sort of things, we had $100 gift cards that we could pass out to those people that were still left on campus. I think we ended up, and I'm not sure because it kind of oscillated a little bit. We ended up with somewhere between 40 and 50 students that were still on campus that were here for reasons. And we helped them out, and also with information to let them know about the CARES Act and that there's money out there for them, and make sure they were signed up on the affordable health care and that they had insurance and those sort of things. So these were the populations of people that we were already addressing. It's just you have to be really diligent about, okay, we already have these populations that are at risk. So make sure that they get special attention so that we don't, lose them or they go hungry or any of those things. It's sort of a moral responsibility as far as anything goes.
Danielle, I know that JCTC has what you call the hub that provides certain services. So I'll let you jump in and talk a little bit about what you all are doing.
Yeah, so Jefferson has a student emergency fund, just like Molly said that they have at Western, and students were able to continue to apply for money to address any kind of emergency that they may be having. So maybe about, I guess, like a week after we were starting to see that this is getting bad and we're probably going to have to go home, staff included, we were able to continue to have food pantry services for our students. And so we had a couple of staff members who volunteered to come and make sure that our students had groceries for the week. And something else that I'm really proud of is that our response to technology. And we know in terms of our minority students that technology can be a barrier to their success. So, okay, we're going online. Well, guess what? Not everybody has Wi-Fi. Not everybody has computers. So what are we going to do? And we responded. Our IT team is tremendous. This is something that we're actually still doing. So through our hub and our IT department, we have been giving students desktop computers and Wi-Fi cards that they can take home free of charge, and that they don't have to worry about returning to the college once all of this is over. We've also set up Wi-Fi parking lots on all of our campuses. So, if you don't have Wi-Fi at home, you're able to come to campus. And so students were applying for that technology through our hub. And we were able to get them from application to pickup you're talking maybe, you know, a 2-day turnaround. And so, you know, arranging times for them to come and work with our IT team to pick up that equipment and go home and get it set up. So not only could they finish this semester, but thinking about future semester, because, you know, as Mike mentioned, we don't know what the fall is going to look like at this point, or, you know, we may have, you know, the curve may turn around and we may be back remote again. So that's something that I'm still proud of that we were able to do to respond to the technology needs. But I also think what's interesting about this time is that colleges and universities everywhere, you're going to find out what kind of relationship and resources you have with minority students. If you didn't know before this, now you know. And so a lot of folks are starting from the ground up in terms of like building these student support services in the middle of a pandemic. And I'm proud of our colleges that a lot of the things that we needed, we already had set up. It was just figuring out, okay, so how do we make this work virtually? How do we make this remote work remotely, and continue to give students that TLC that they need? And so the hub is probably going to be, in terms of the food pantry services, hopefully a phase 2 reopening for us in terms of continuing to that food pantry service. But the hub is not only food pantry. No, we have a licensed social worker that works with our students in terms of any crisis that they may be trying to navigate. And so that work has been continuing. So having a professional who knows the background and the resources and being able to also financially help students has been amazing for us during this time.
Mike, you want to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say again, I was thoroughly impressed, and I should have started at the outset. I'm coming up on my one year anniversary at Bellarmine on June 3rd, and so I've been thoroughly impressed with the campus community. And so I will say, in general, technology was something that was obviously a priority for us. Our IT team responded very well in trying to engage, you know, students, faculty, and staff to understand what those needs are or were. Looking at that digital divide that Danielle and both Molly have already touched on. And so students who needed to stay on campus to continue to have Wi-Fi access, the library remained open for students. That remained readily available. The food insecurity, which you've already addressed on there, we do have a food pantry that remained open throughout the duration of the spring semester. So that was a priority for us. We created an emergency fund this year where initially I think the range was from like $0 to $400. And then once, you know, COVID hit and we saw some of the negative financial implications, we adjusted that to focus more on students from low income backgrounds. And so with the what you call allocation through the CARES Act, we were able to beef up the funding allocation that we had for the emergency grants. Also, as Molly mentioned, we engaged our alumni. We raised about $180,000 from about 400 plus alumni because they certainly have a passion for that. Now, as far as many of our vulnerable populations, many of our students of color, our Office of Identity and Inclusion did a remarkable job in terms of reaching out to students and making sure that they remain engaged. And I'll also say that we also celebrated many of our students who were graduating. And that was important because I know one of the questions that came up was about how do we make sure that those coming down the pike or who are coming to Bellarmine remain focused on the value of higher education. And so we made sure to celebrate those students and communicate that to students and families so that they understand that, yes, we are, this COVID-19 situation is wreaking havoc, but not only just think about the present, but also thinking about the future and continuing to invest in students and families there. So those are, you know, some of the things that we did and that we're continuing to include in our planning efforts as we look towards the fall.
So your comments are sparking several questions that we have in the chat, and I want to make sure that I'm keeping up with them so that we're not flip-flopping back with topics. But before we move on, I wanted to go back a little bit. There were some questions about enrollment, the things that you all said in terms of your enrollment and how COVID has affected the enrollment. And so there is a question about, are each of you seeing differences in enrollments in the subgroups of URM students? And then are there any special considerations that need to be taken, for instance, thinking about ESL students, or even in some cases, international students? You know, how are you all, what are you all seeing in terms of those trends? Molly,
I can tell you that, yeah, our international student enrollment is way down. So the ESL accordingly is going to go down. Our African American student population, Hispanic, looks pretty steady, but our international student population was downward trending anyway. So I don't know how much is related. I mean, that's one of the things when you look at these complex situations, is like, is it COVID or was it this? And I think that your intervention would depend on what it is that makes that enrollment go down. I do know that our Office of International Programs is working to try to find out where the problem is right now. But I don't know that we've really identified what that is. I did look at those breakdowns though, and the international population is the one that's down for WKU. So if that helps me.
So for Jefferson, our African American student population and Hispanic population is down. And so one of the things that we have done here at Jefferson is we have, I have assembled a minority student enrollment task force to look at those populations to see what strategies do we need to be using and deploying to engage these students. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing hopefully next week is looking at all of our minority students who have submitted a transcript and, you know, done their application, but they've stopped. You know, and so like, what can we do to help get you to the next point, which will be registration and FAFSA and all of that. And so that's going to be a lot of groundwork. That's cold calling students. Hey, you know, how you doing? You know, I see you submitted your transcript, and I just wanted to see like, what can we do to help you enroll? Like, what's preventing you from enrolling? And so that's something that everybody should be doing. Drilling down that data to see, you know, that was a great question about subgroup. Another thing that we're going to have to focus on is language. You know, so one of the things that we're getting ready to do is working with a community partner in terms of doing some type of FAFSA live or Facebook Live for students. So how are you going to translate that into Spanish and other languages that students may need that information? And so you have to go where our students are. And right now what I'm seeing is that's on social media. They are TikToking and they are on our KCTCS app asking those questions. And so we have some dedicated staff members, because they'll go to their app before they will send an administrator an email and ask a question. And so we have 2 employees who are in our KCTCS app answering students' questions in real time. And, you know, if there's a language barrier, you know, they're reaching out to folks who speak. They want to say, hey, we have students who have a language barrier. Like, what can we do to help them? And so we have to be prepared more now than ever to go where these students are, because in students' heads, okay, the college is closed. That means all of those services are closed. All of that is eliminated. And so right now you have to over communicate and demonstrate care. So that's what I'm glad that we have been able to do, and we will be continuing to do.
So at Bellarmine, we're seeing an increase in all parts of the funnel. So the top of the funnel as far as interest, applicants, admits, and then confirmations or deposits. And so in each one of those sort of phases, you'll see about a 2 to 3% increase. The first generation students is still hovering about where we've been, but we've seen an increase over like the last decade, but we're at about 35% for the first year class, and then 23% for our transfer class. We're seeing an increase in the number of students from low income backgrounds, 3% increase in our Pell admits. And in terms of the expected family contribution, we've seen a decrease, which obviously demonstrates financial need there. We've also seen an increase in the number of appeals requests, as well as financial aid appeals requests, and those that we've approved. We've seen an uptick in the number of students requesting to be able to work during this time, or work on campus, or have some sort of job opportunities. Seen an increase in the number of veterans. And I will just say, as I indicated, I'm coming up on year 1, but we've made significant changes in just recruiting, trying to recruit and retain talented staff who look like our underrepresented students. And we've also partnered with, as I said, with our Office of Identity and Inclusion to do the recruitment and retention efforts we were planning to do an on-campus student of color event, and obviously we were unable to do that. Well, the team worked closely because in enrollment management, we created a diversity and access ad hoc committee. They quickly moved that on to online. We had it this past Saturday. We had a handful of students, but we saw it as an opportunity to continue these virtual sessions. As part of our new strategic plan, one of our strategic priorities is equity and inclusion, the diversity, equity, inclusion. So we have a senior diversity, equity, inclusion officer, the first one at Bellarmine. And so he'll begin actually on Monday. And so we're excited about a lot of the work that we have going on. We're continuing to build in the training of our faculty and staff to be able to understand that as we move online, some of what Danielle mentioned as far as the digital divide, people not having the internet, the bandwidth, as well as the just having access to technology. People being mindful of that. So you're thinking about the difference between synchronous and asynchronous work, instruction that's going on. And so for us, we want to make sure that we not only address the diversity piece and seeing the numbers, but also mindful of equity and inclusion and making sure that we're trying to level the playing field for our students to grow, learn, and develop.
So before we leave the topics of enrollment and retention, et cetera, there's a question for Molly and Mike in reference to the impact that this pandemic has had on your URM graduate student population, if you've seen any. So could either of you speak to the graduate student population?
You want me to go first, Mike, or do you want to go?
It's up to you.
I will say that we have an issue with the graduate population, period, and that's the thing that I'm beginning to notice. It's like trying to weed it out and decide what was COVID and what was just happening anyway. We do have a minority scholarship for graduate, and we've had quite a few applicants. We're in the process now of going through that, but I do not know what our graduate enrollment looks like. I just pulled undergrad, and that's my bad. I should have pulled the graduate too. But I don't think that there has been much of the change, because I think I looked probably back right when all of this happened at our graduate enrollment, because we were talking about the scholarship. So I think that probably that's what, I mean, this is sort of what we're going to do to try to counteract it. But we've only been giving out like 9 or 10 of these minority scholarships, and we're going to try to give out a lot more. So we're going to try to head it off at the pass before I even try to figure out whether it was COVID related or just a fall off in enrollment period. So Mike probably has more information there, Bellarmine.
Yeah, and I was going to say for us, we've seen an uptick in our graduate student enrollment numbers. And so proportionately, we're holding steady in terms of our URM numbers. We haven't necessarily seen a change there. Now, some of that is because some of our programs have become more flexible and innovative. And so now those that were strictly on ground have moved to either blended or online. I know our School of Education typically has probably the most diverse group of graduate students and second degree students that we have there. And so we're holding steady. But the nice thing about it is, when I say proportionately, we've also seen an uptick in the number of students pursuing graduate education at Bellarmine. So that's been encouraging.
So as we move into this next kind of category, we've got questions relating to ensuring that students have connections or feel connected, and students having relationships, building relationships and building the sense of community. So one of the first questions that we have deals with the idea of, have you explored what it means to, amid this pandemic, what it means to have the sense of community and community engagement as it relates to the general population of students and your URM students? What ideas have you all explored to keep this sense of community and students engaged?
So our URM enrollment task force, that's one of the things that we're about to start looking at. I think one of the key points that student affairs or higher ed folks need to be thinking about is that you're going to have to start that much earlier now. So you can't wait until welcome week now to start trying to build community and make students, feel like, okay, I found my people. You're gonna have to start over the summer, building kind of some of those relationships with students from that. And so what I see a lot of institutions doing is, especially since I know for us, we can't do SOAR, which is our orientation. None of that is in person. So how are you going to engage and welcome students and make them feel like, nothing's changed. We're just virtual now. And so we're thinking about programmatically, like what can we do to engage the class of 2020, those first-time students, mind you, which, if they're traditional high school students. So some of that, I think, has to be through social media, because, again, that's where our students are. And we have to be innovative in, like, how we do that programming. So one thing that we were able to do here was to continue programming through the semester. So it's just like, okay, so how can we be creative and put it online and make it interactive and not just tell students, hey, watch this TED Talk and then we'll discuss. But we're gonna have to start doing that now, as in like June 1. How can we engage them? So the key, I think, is going to be to start early, because you're gonna have to work twice as hard, because every student may not be into social media. So how do you, or they may not be into, Microsoft Teams call, or just being online. So how are you going to create community? And I think the key is going to be starting early.
So we're talking about that, looking at the sense of community and belonging, and people want to know, what are we doing to create that sense of belonging for these students, particularly as it might be in this virtual and online environment. So I'll let Molly go ahead and jump in.
Well, interestingly enough, you did a really good job kind of putting this panel together, because I'm on the faculty side of this. So I'm sure there's probably other people that are faculty. So I'm an academic person. And a lot of times I really don't know what they're doing on this side over here. I know in general what they're doing in student affairs, or as we call it, enrollment and student engagement. But what I've been trying to do is work with our Center for Teaching and Learning to talk to faculty about how you interact online, because it's a little bit different. So we're trying to put some workshops together about how diversity, equity, inclusion is a little bit different when we're talking about an online environment than it is in face-to-face. And we quite haven't got to the face-to-face pedagogy yet. But one of the things that I noticed as a faculty member is that I have to chase students down a little bit more. They're a little bit uneasy about this. And every morning I have what I call the Lizzo check-in. I was like, baby, how you doing? How you feeling today? So we would do it, and we would make sure. And then when people were missing, I'd go find them. So trying to share with faculty too, that it's not just student affairs jobs to get the students on campus. It's not housing and all of those things 100% responsibility. You all bring them to us, and then we got to keep them in our classroom. So that's really important. The people that maybe aren't as great with technology, you've got to help them out. You got to pull them up. So I kind of felt like I was a little bit being one of those flight directors and pushing buttons, and some people would chat, some people did this, some people didn't want to be on camera, and you have to deal with all of that at one time. But following these students around and having a totally different relationship with them it's kind of hard. I had students that totally disappeared, so the only way I could find them was to email them. I just kept emailing them. We also set up this system that if I just couldn't email anymore because of my time, is that I could go into what we have TopNet, which is through Banner and all of that, and I could push a button and go. It went straight to student affairs and said, would you please help me? I've lost a student. So then we had like a whole group of people over in advising that would start calling them on the phone and looking for them, because I necessarily didn't have a whole lot of time to do that sort of thing. But from just the sitting in the classroom section, it was really hard on students. They hated the online format at first. So you have to be really creative and try to, this sense of the Brady Bunch community on your screen is really, really important to make sure that the people, and you'll put them in breakout groups, do what you can so that they can start. So I switched and had group projects. So there's only 3 or 4 of them, and then they follow each other on whatever their little apps are and on everything that they use. But that was a real important part, that it's not just the student affairs side's responsibility to make sure that they belong on a campus, but it's faculty's job as well. So we're trying to build some stuff in with our Center for Teaching and Learning about how to do this for URM students and how, you know, connections are different and how you make this work for everybody in your classroom.
Can I just say what Molly just said as a student affairs professional, like really made my heart smile. Like, and I think what you just described should be a standard of practice across all colleges and universities, pandemic or non-pandemic. Because as an industry, we are not, and this is not just Kentucky, this is higher ed in general, we are not in a position where we can be losing customers, which is our students. And so I just think what you described, you know, retention and enrollment and fundraising is everybody's business. I had a mentor teaching me that very early. And so we all have to work to keep students here and get students here. And I just wish I could see more of what Molly described, just, you know, where everybody feels like it's my responsibility. You know, this student signed up to take my course. So it's not weird for me to call or reach out or say, hey, like my Lizzo check-in, like what's going on, girl? Like that's my thing. Like what's, like, sis, where you been, bro? What's going on? And it shouldn't be weird because it's a demonstration of care. And I think that through this pandemic, colleges and universities should be doing that. That's morally the right thing to do. And if you can't do it on that reason alone, think of it as job security, you know? But I just think that we need more of what you described, and everybody needs to see it as their responsibility because students are entrusting us with their next 2 or 3 or 4 years. And so they want to leave this thing successful with a credential or a degree. And if you're not adding to that, then like, what are we doing? You know, like, what are we doing? So thank you, Molly. I'm going to put everything you said on a t-shirt and I will be selling them because it was
right. Cool. Yeah.
And to follow up on that, though, I think for us, it's really one thing that we're trying to do is to ensure that we're not creating 2 experiences. So even if we decide to move forward with the combination, the hybrid of being on ground and online, that students don't feel like they're getting 2 experiences and it's just one Bellarmine experience. And so through that, we're really trying to build this affinity for Bellarmine through social channels, you know, through the website, through email campaigns, through phone campaigns. And so we've really done that. We've tried to identify the sort of best practices there. We're also engaging our alumni to conduct outreach to students and sort of talk about the value proposition. We're engaging some of our current parents and prospective parents who have really been actively involved in the process. So for them to get a sense of sort of that authentic, genuine Bellarmine experience. The other piece is our students, who are our best ambassadors, our current students, are reaching out to other current students and prospective or admitted students. So from an academic standpoint, you know, we're having sessions just talking about managing, you know, your major, your academic programs, how you can maximize that. Our career and professional development has done sessions to talk about the experiential learning, internships, professional and career development. And then even for our incoming admitted students, as I said, there have been parents who have shown a high affinity for Bellarmine, but then there are other students, incoming students, who have really displayed a great sense of enthusiasm and excitement for the institution. And so that peer-to-peer connection is really sort of the opportunity for us to generate some excitement. And I would be remiss from a marketing standpoint, we're making sure that the brand there's a level of consistency and continuity all the way through. And so we've been working very closely with Marcom to make sure that whatever is going out, again, is adapted for the audience, but is consistent across the board.
I was going to bring that marketing and communication question up before we got off this Zoom call, so I'm glad that you said that. But we have a question that I think segues well with what you were just saying, and it was talking about families may be more involved in educational decision making more than ever before. And so how are we interacting with families to help them understand the new transition options? So I know you spoke to that a little bit, Mike, about working with families and making sure that they're engaged. But if Molly or Danielle want to chime in as well in terms of what else are we doing, or can we do at least with families moving forward. And Mike, you might also want to address it from a marketing standpoint too, if you want to take that opportunity.
Danielle, you want to go, or you want me to go? Mine's more what we can do. So one of the things I think we have problems with in higher education is communication, period. Is that, you know, we don't have the same communication. So faculty to faculty, faculty to staff, staff to staff, parents, students, it's all sort of a different sort of way we talk. We should talk the same way to everybody. And reaching out to people and talking to people in the same way, especially during a crisis, it's good crisis communication. You know, you keep it short, you show you care, you keep it positive, you uplifting, you got to be patient with people and meet them on the same kind of thing. I'm not 100% sure that we're doing that to the best of our ability right now, but I know that everybody on our staff is doing what they can. I just noticed that I'll get a message, and I'm on staff and faculty both on the lists. So the message I get from one person as the faculty side, I get a different message from the same person on the staff side. And I think the consistent communication and that message that everyone's getting needs to go out to the parents as well. You know, we can't have two different stories. It has to be truthful. We have to speak the truth. We have to be transparent, and we have to communicate the same message to everybody. I think it's extremely important. And communicate. Don't be silent. That's another thing that's like, you know, it's like you go with 3 weeks without hearing anybody. It's like, do I still have a job? Do I still work there? Do I still go to school there? So, I mean, just constant little snippets of things with the same message is what I would recommend. But I don't know. Danielle's probably doing some great magic up there, though.
I will say our marketing team.
We got a good marketing team too. So
I think community colleges are in a unique position where we still have to be conscientious and play nice with our four-year counterparts. So we can't just overtly say, hey, it's going to be much cheaper, you know, to come to a community college, because that's not nice. You know, we're partners in this, right? And so our marketing team has thought about, like, how can we still say, like, community college is a viable option, but not snub our four-year partners. And so one of the things that we did and we are doing is that a letter went out from our president to our JCPS, so that's Louisville's school district, went out to those high school graduates, just welcoming them and telling them to, you know, consider Jefferson, you know, an option. I think parents may be leery of, you know, sending students off to school, especially if you are sending a student to an institution that may didn't have the kind of social distancing rules that we had in place. And so I think community colleges are going to be a more viable option for students right now. But how do we communicate that message without snubbing our four-year partners? And then also thinking about where are parents going to get their information. So parents, when it's in terms of social media, most times they're not on the same platforms as their students. Like if it's a traditional age student, quote unquote, 18, parents are probably not on TikTok. They're probably on Facebook like my mom is. So how do you put these messages places where they're parent accessible and parent friendly, and just do what Molly just said, like just spit it out. Be transparent. Don't use all this high level language that folks don't know about, or these internal acronyms that we love in higher ed that nobody knows the meaning but us. So like, how do we put this information where parents are going to be? And so that made us think about agencies here in Louisville, like, you know, our Urban League, like how do we put messages at La Casita, you know, places where we know parents may be. And also, again, putting that information in the languages that they can read, especially if you're dealing with parents of international students or ESL students, they may not speak English, right? So how do we get this in their hands where it's accessible? Because again, you have to think parents are not where their kids are most times, students are. And how do you still play nice? Because at the end of the day, we still have to have a great relationship with all of our four-year partners because we're all working together.
Danielle, you keep bringing up TikTok, and I'll say over the weekend I did try to learn a TikTok dance, and then I told the people, you know, if this was Thriller, I would have it down. So I'm going to stay in my decade and let you young folk do TikTok, and I'll do Facebook and Thriller. But
Yeah.
Mike, from your
I think that-
marketing and communications perspective, Mike, what advice do you have in terms of getting this message across?
I think you kind of touched on it. We're really we know in the workplace, we're dealing with 5 different generations. And so it's important to know your audience. Danielle talked about, and Molly talked about, creating sort of this simple, straightforward message that's clear, concise, and precise. The other piece is the channels or the mediums in which we're engaging those folks. So if you're trying to reach parents, going through TikTok is not the way to go about doing it, or Snapchat. But if you think about, the Facebook and YouTube, in some cases, you may be able to leverage the different channels. So I think it's important to understand your audience and that message that's being conveyed. I do think the whole concept of human-centered design is important. And so how can you get parents, some of your current parents, use them in the process to make sure they have a sense of voice and agency, helping you to shape that message that's going out and allowing them to react to it before you send it out. Because I'll tell you, our Marcom team has done a bang-up job throughout this process in terms of the cadence, as far as the frequency, the pattern that's going out. I'll tell you, one time we had a message, though we didn't follow our process, and that's when it generated the most questions and confusion. So I will say, if you can sort of develop that process and stick to it, even if at times you got to quickly turn around a message, if you can just sort of follow that protocol, that can be helpful. The other piece for us is, identify what are the themes or, those aspects, elements of your brand that you want to communicate. And so what message are you trying to communicate? It's like I always ask the team, what problem are we trying to solve? So in that case, you can identify that, and as you're testing that on different constituents, you can get a sense of whether or not you're meeting your mark. And I think developing from now until probably December should build out a communication plan and flow, and seeing how regularly are you engaging your constituents. And so every week we're trying to have various touch points with our different audiences, regardless of what it may be. As I said, we celebrated our May 2020 graduates, both at the undergrad and graduate levels, and we were sharing that with high school counselors, community college folks. And so the other piece I would say from a parent standpoint is, how are we, and Danielle touched on this, we're not necessarily snubbing, we don't feel like we're being snubbed by the work that we're doing, but how are we then collaborating to making sure that we're setting up those pathways to help folks be successful, sort of 2-year, 4-year, beyond, is really, we're trying to understand how we can map out those pathways or create more flexible, convenient programs. And one of the things to think about is, I mentioned we have 35% of our students who are first gen. So Danielle, you were talking about customers. There's an opportunity there for us to actually work with those families and seeing how we can engage them and allow them to pursue their higher education as well.
So a question had come in through our registration. Then again, what advice do you have overall for the first generation college students that are already apprehensive about college in general, but then this whole pandemic has set us into a whole different pathway? So is there anything in terms of your marketing or your messaging or your communication that would change when you are giving advice to the already apprehensive first gen student? Danielle, how would you have those students come in? Does it change, or is it the same, or is it more intense?
I think it's more intense, because I think if you are a first gen student, like my question to them is like, what's the alternative? If not now, when? And if this isn't the right time to enroll in college, even if you're going to get a short credential and get one of these high demand, high wage jobs so you can start working immediately, like, what are you putting it out for? So what are you doing? And I always ask students, okay, so what's your alternative? And most times they don't have one. So I'm saying, okay, so what are you doing? So I think for them more now than ever, this is the time. And I graduated college in '08 during the recession, which is actually nothing like this. And because of the recession, that's what prompted me to go to graduate school. And that decision changed my life. So if you can knock it out now or start, just chug away at that degree, now is the time. I would bet, and if we're going to be remote or continue remote learning at some level, you're probably going to have more flexibility this way. Faculty members may be recording, and you may not be required to, be physically in class at a certain time. And then too, like if you get an assured credential, like a CNA or HVAC or something like that, you can start working immediately. It's not going to take you a long time. So I think you have to sell it to students in a way, because this generation, this is the microwave generation. They are not the crock pot folks. They don't have a lot of time. They want to get it done and be rich today. When I talk about, they want to be rich right now. They don't want to, like, what can I do to make 70K today? And so you have to sell it to them that way. Okay, well, if you do this, and if you take 2 classes a semester, you'll have your CNA, in about a year and a half. And so you have to put it to them in terms of dollars and money, because that's how this generation sees success. And they don't want to spend a lot of time doing stuff. You have to put it in real time for them. So I think for them, it's more urgent than ever. Like, this is the time, because if you're putting it off, why are you putting it off? But what's preventing you from starting today? Because those same barriers will probably be there a year from now. But now you have more flexibility in terms of college and your classes. And I think colleges and faculty and staff, we learned a lot that we need to do better during this time. And I think that, I know for me as a graduate student, my faculty members have extended me a lot of grace during this time that I probably wouldn't have gotten if we were, still meeting regularly. So I think you have to express the urgency of now to these first gen students who those same barriers that they're thinking about, that they're facing today, will probably be here a year from now. And they're probably maybe in an even worse situation financially because they haven't done anything to put themselves in a position to pull themselves out of poverty.
Yeah, I totally agree with that whole thing. And I think that, watching the news, they keep selling this idea of the gap year and the gap year. The gap year is made for a small part of our population. A gap year is to go backpacking in Europe and, finding yourself. That's not most of our population, the students we deal with in Kentucky. That's not. A gap year to our students means I'm never going to go to college. And I think if anything that they saw what happened with the people who were educated, we didn't go lose our jobs and go on unemployment. We all worked at home. And if you're working in a restaurant and those sort of things, you ended up on unemployment. So I think the urgency is the most important thing. And I'm seeing that when I talk to students also that are graduating seniors, and they're, should I go to grad school? I'm like, oh yeah, now is the time for you to go to grad school. So I have written probably 25 letters for graduate school. I'm just like, go. I don't care if it's UK, U of L, Western, wherever you want to go, but go. Because that whole notion of gap and waiting is just not for the students that we deal with. It just isn't. And I don't want them to get, some sort of fairy tale that it's going to be better if they wait. So.
And I would say, I think it's a good question, and Danielle and Molly did a good job of responding to it. I would respond to it in the sense of, because I read a book last year, the Student Ready College, which kind of is that different approach as opposed to looking at the student who's college ready. And so I think on the college side, again, this goes back to the communication, but also how are we communicating what that return on investment is going to be? Because even those, like Molly, as you said, there are some people who are college educated who may have lost their job, but because of the skills that they acquired, they were able to pivot and adapt in a much more nimble fashion than others. And so I think it's important to talk about the investment, and not just the short term and the immediate, but also the longer term. And I agree with Danielle as far as Generation Z in this sense, and that they're looking for instant gratification, but they are looking. The operative word in there is the gratification piece, because they do have a social responsibility or social justice orientation. And especially when you see many of these sort of injustices that occur in society. And so how can you marry sort of the purpose and the passion that students may have and translate it into a way where the lay prospective student, Generation Z or any of the other generations, where that they can understand what that payoff will be. And so, like, for example, we keep talking about how much students will pay at Bellarmine in the course of 4 years or a year. In some cases, for us, it's how do we even break it down, what it would look like, if you're paying for it by month in terms of financing it. And so making it something that seems like it's attainable or viable is also important when working with students and their families.
So we have a really specific question. I'll start, I think, with Molly being from the faculty side of it, but it's how do we help lower income students who are in tech heavy majors, computer science, graphic design, broadcast journalism, etc., where they might need special software or equipment? Because it could be that in those areas, we might lose those students to what's considered more low-tech academic areas. So in terms of looking at students that might need special equipment, that might not have access to it or what have you, has there been any conversation that you're aware of from that faculty perspective, Molly, about how we can keep those students engaged?
I can tell you I'm not a science person. I actually teach social justice and stuff, but I am in the sociology department, and one of the things is it wasn't communicated well, but my license on my SPSS ran out, and I went to our IT to download it to get it, and it's free. It's not $100 as it normally is. So I sent them an email and I said, so is this just for faculty or is it for students? They said, any kind of IT thing that we have that we can offer free, we're letting students download it for free. So I do know that your IT departments can do that, so that, and I know that there are all these chemistry things that you can do online. All of that through our IT department, I believe right now is free. And, the whole process of giving people laptops and desktops are fabulous. We're doing the laptop thing, but programs that you can, get a license through your IT department and, start, giving them out and distributing them. I do the same thing with textbooks, because that can be an issue too. If you're already having to deal with all this other stuff, can you find a way to put your textbook on your online program? So I don't even have textbooks anymore. I do open source. So open source your textbooks, open source any of your programs you can get. Find any of those things out there that would help you be able to help the students do computer programming, running SPSS files, and any kind of research, because research is going to be a problem. We're looking at that with grad school right now. It's like, how do you do research with people when you can't be face-to-face? I've got 6 students in the field this summer that are doing community garden projects. It's like, how are you going to do a community project? So we're getting on Zoom and trying to figure out ways to do this so that they can do interviewing, free SPSS, so they can run data and all of those sort of things. So that's where I would start, definitely.
And I would go back to, Dawn, that human-centered design and making sure that students have a voice in the process. Because I think sometimes that lack of perspective can create, obviously we walk into certain situations with a level of bias. And so sometimes we miss out on those opportunities. So engaging them and being transparent and making ourselves vulnerable, as a Brene Brown would say, in terms of making ourselves vulnerable and letting them know that we don't necessarily have all the answers, and we want to engage you in that process, understand how we might be able to shape this experience or process with your best interest in mind.
That's the first time I've ever heard a man quote Brene Brown. I just have to
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to say I thank you for the panelists and taking out their time to give us their expertise. And we have like 2 minutes. And so as we wrap up, are there any just 30-second, 45-second thoughts that you want to just leave in terms of how we're addressing this issue of enrollment and retention amid COVID for this 2020 perspective in the fall? And so I will start with Danielle.
I think if you are in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, if you weren't before, now you need to be in everybody's business. You need to know what's going on in financial aid to make sure that those processes are equitable. our financial aid director, I went to her about our CARES Act money and said, okay, so how are we going to make this process equitable and make sure that our minority students, know about this, know how to apply for it, and like, how can and also when you say that, be willing to lend a hand. And how can my team and I play a role in this and make sure that we get this money to students fast and quick. And so we were able to go through about 1,000 CARES applications in a week here at Jefferson because of that collaboration. So if you're in DEI work, you need to be collaborating and in everybody's business, because you don't want minority students to miss out on opportunities because of failed communication, or we're not putting messages in the right place, and we're not considering the barriers that they may be facing that may make their situation unique to whatever process or policy we're trying to build.
Thank you. Molly?
Kind of second that, and to jump off from that is that our DEI team was not included in any of the restart, reopening committees or anything. You got to push your way in because people don't think about this, and you got to say, hey, did you think about the URM students? And you've got to push your way in because the people sometimes at the top don't think to ask you what you think. So, you got to be that pushy woman or that pushy whatever, or pushy man, excuse me, Michael. But, you just got to be pushy.
And Michael, was our last communication?
I would just say, you have to understand all of those student segments. We have a first year predictive model that focuses on a lot of populations, but it doesn't capture everything per se. And so we have to be mindful of sort of the quantitative and qualitative insights to help guide the work that we're doing. And don't just plan for the short term, but also look out on the horizon and see longer term, because this new normal, some people keep saying, well, we're going to go back to normal. This new normal is going to be around for a good while. And so being mindful of that as we develop processes, policies, procedures moving forward for all student populations. And the other thing I just want to reemphasize is what Danielle said. This is everyone's responsibility. And so I know that I referenced our OII Office of Identity and Inclusion, and they do great work. I mentioned our Senior Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. He's going to do great work, but at the end of the day, we all have a responsibility to ensure that we see our students progress and succeed. So, and thank you again for coordinating this panel. It certainly was a pleasure. So
thank you for taking out your time, and thank you for our attendees who always follow us with our webinar series. And so we appreciate you, and we hope you all have a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.